Hi, I'm Katherine. My sister took everything I loved and laughed in my face. But she never knew about the secret $85 million account our grandfather left me. Just wait, he'd whispered on his deathbed. Let them show who they really are first. When she dragged me to court thinking she'd humiliate me one final time, the judge's ruling changed everything. The look on her face when she realized what had happened? Priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day of our grandfather's funeral was appropriately gray and cold. Raindrops scattered across the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church, like tears the sky couldn't hold back. I adjusted my simple black dress, the only one I owned that was appropriate for the occasion, and clutched my small beaded purse as I approached the grand oak doors. My sister Victoria was already inside, of course. Center of attention, dressed in designer mourning wear that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her perfectly manicured hand rested on the casket, her face arranged in an expression of profound grief that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd always been the better performer between us. An usher approached as I entered, his expression professional but dismissive. "Family is seated in the front," he said, barely glancing at me. "I am family," I replied quietly. "I'm Katherine Winters." Charles Winters was my grandfather. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, then narrowed. "Oh, Miss Katherine, I was told immediate family only in the front rows." I knew exactly who had told him that. Victoria caught my eye from across the room and the corner of her mouth twitched up. Just enough for me to notice, not enough for anyone else to see. It was the same smirk she'd worn the day she'd convinced our parents I had broken the antique vase when we were children. The same one she'd flashed when she'd stolen my boyfriend in high school. The same one I'd seen when she'd been named the sole beneficiary of our parents' estate after their accident 5 years ago. "I understand," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll sit in the back." The back row was cold and hard, and I could barely see past the sea of black-clothed shoulders to the front where my grandfather's casket lay. The printed program in my hands made no mention of me. Beloved by his granddaughter Victoria Winters Hamilton, it read. No mention of his other granddaughter. No mention of the one who had spent weekends fishing with him while Victoria was at social events. No mention of the one who had read to him during his final months when Victoria was too busy managing his portfolio. The eulogies were predictable. Victoria, stunning in her grief, spoke of his generosity, his vision, his love for family. Her husband Blake stood supportively at her side, his hand on her shoulder. Old business partners spoke of Charles Winters' brilliance in building Winters Global Enterprises from nothing. No one mentioned his kindness, his terrible jokes, his passion for teaching us to play chess. No one mentioned the man I knew. As the service concluded, I remained seated while others filed out. Victoria led the procession, her head held high, accepting condolences with practiced grace. When the church had nearly emptied, I approached the casket to say my private goodbye. "I miss you already," I whispered, placing my hand on the polished wood. "I don't know what I'll do without you." "Katherine." Victoria's voice cut through my moment of grief. She stood at the end of the aisle, Blake hovering behind her like a shadow. "The cars are waiting. We need to lock up." I nodded and turned to leave, but she stepped forward, blocking my path. "Don't bother coming to the house," she said, her voice honey-sweet but laced with venom. "It's family only." "I am family, Victoria. He was my grandfather too," she laughed, the sound echoing harshly against the church's vaulted ceiling. "Family? You haven't been family since you dropped out of Harvard to find yourself. Do you know how embarrassing that was for him, for all of us?" "He never said he was embarrassed," I replied, my voice steady, despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "He supported my decision. He was too kind to tell you the truth." She adjusted her designer sunglasses. "The reading of the will is tomorrow at noon. Don't be late, though I doubt there's much reason for you to attend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I spent that night in my small apartment, surrounded by photos of Grandpa Charles and me. There was one of us at my college graduation, before I had realized corporate law wasn't my calling. Another of us on his sailboat, wind tousling our hair. A third of us playing chess in the garden of the family estate, the one Victoria now lived in with Blake. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was mocking the darkness I felt inside. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since leaving my brief legal career. It wasn't designer, but it was professional, respectable. I wouldn't give Victoria another reason to look down on me. The family attorney, Mr. Fitzgerald, had his office in a historic building downtown. As I entered the wood-paneled conference room, Victoria and Blake were already seated, along with two of Grandpa's longtime business associates. Victoria barely acknowledged my presence with a slight nod. "Now that we're all here," Mr. Fitzgerald began, adjusting his reading glasses, "we can proceed with the reading of Charles Winter's last will and testament." I sat quietly as he read through the standard legal preamble. Victoria maintained her expression of appropriate grief, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. To my granddaughter, Victoria Winters Hamilton, I leave my primary residence, my collection of art and antiques, and my controlling shares in Winters Global Enterprises. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the triumph beneath. Blake squeezed her hand, their matching wedding bands catching the light. "To my loyal associates," Mr. Fitzgerald continued, "I leave the following monetary bequests as a token of my appreciation for your years of service." He listed amounts that made my eyes widen. Grandpa had always been generous, but these were substantial sums. When he finished, he cleared his throat and looked directly at me for the first time. "To my granddaughter, Katherine Winters, I leave my personal effects, my collection of books, and my fishing equipment." Victoria's laugh was barely disguised as a cough. Mr. Fitzgerald continued reading, detailing various charitable donations and smaller bequests to distant relatives. When he finished, he removed his glasses and folded the document. "That concludes the reading of the will. Are there any questions?" I sat in stunned silence. Not because I had expected a fortune, I hadn't, but because my grandfather had known how much I loved our conversations about books, how much I treasured our fishing trips. His bequest was deeply personal, unlike Victoria's inheritance of assets and control. But it still hurt to be so clearly demarcated as the less favored granddaughter. As we prepared to leave, Mr. Fitzgerald approached me privately. "Miss Katherine, if you could stay a moment? There's a small matter concerning your grandfather's personal effects." Victoria overheard and smirked. "Don't worry, Katherine. I'll have someone box up his old books and fishing rods and send them to your apartment." She managed to make apartment sound like cardboard box under a bridge. Once Victoria and Blake had departed, Mr. Fitzgerald's demeanor changed subtly. He seemed almost nervous. "Miss Katherine, there's something else. A private letter your grandfather asked me to deliver to you after the reading." He handed me an envelope, sealed with the Winters family crest in wax. My name was written on it in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. "What is this?" I asked, turning it over in my hands. "I don't know the contents," Mr. Fitzgerald replied. "Your grandfather was very specific. The letter was to be given to you alone after the formal reading." I slipped it into my purse. "Thank you." "There's one more thing," he added hesitantly. "Your grandfather asked me to tell you to read it somewhere private. Somewhere safe." I nodded, puzzled by his emphasis on safety, and left the office. Victoria and Blake were still in the lobby, talking with the business associates. Victoria noticed me and excused herself, approaching with faux concern. "Poor Katherine," she said, just loud enough for others to hear. "I know you were hoping for more, but really, what would you have done with any significant assets? You can barely manage your teacher's salary." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. After leaving law school, I'd found my calling as an elementary school teacher. It didn't pay much, but I loved it. Grandpa had always said he was proud of me for following my heart. "The books mean more to me than money," I replied evenly. Victoria rolled her eyes. So noble. Such a martyr. Just like when you insisted on reading to him in those final months, instead of letting the nurses handle it. Always trying to prove you're the better granddaughter. That wasn't what I was doing. No? Her voice dropped so only I could hear. Well, it doesn't matter now, does it? I won the inheritance, I won the company, and I won our little lifelong competition. Just like I always do. She patted my arm condescendingly. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Grandpa's legacy. I stepped back from her touch. I'm sure you will. Oh, and Katherine? She called as I turned to leave. Don't bother trying to contest the will. Grandpa was of sound mind, and everything was done by the book. You'll just waste what little money you have on legal fees. I didn't respond. The weight of the letter in my purse seemed to grow heavier with each step I took toward the exit. That evening, alone in my apartment, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Grandpa's personal stationery, covered in his increasingly frail handwriting. My dearest Katherine, it began. If you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've just sat through what must have been a rather disappointing reading of my will. For that, I apologize. But there are things you need to understand. I settled deeper into my reading chair, the same one I'd sit in while reading to him during his final months. First, you must know that I have always been proudest of you. Not Victoria, you. You have your grandmother's heart, and my stubborn integrity. Victoria, for all her accomplishments, has neither. Tears pricked at my eyes as I continued reading. Second, what happened today was necessary. Victoria needs to believe she has won everything. Her nature demands it. But I have made other arrangements. My heart began to race. There exists an account, established decades ago, before your parents were even born. I originally created it as a safety net, separate from the family business. Over the years, it has grown substantially. The current balance is approximately $85 million. I gasped, nearly dropping the letter. This account is now yours. But accessing it requires patience and discretion. I have arranged for transfer of ownership through a series of offshore entities that will take exactly 60 days to complete. During this time, you must not breathe a word of this to anyone, especially Victoria. The letter continued, detailing the name of a Swiss banker I was to contact after the 60 days had passed, along with passwords and account numbers. Katherine, my girl, I know you have never cared about money or power. That is precisely why you should have both. Not Victoria, who covets them too much. You, who will use them wisely. The final paragraph made my hands tremble. Victoria will not stand idle once she realizes the truth. Be prepared. Be strong. And remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes you must sacrifice a piece to win the game. I have sacrificed my final months with you, letting Victoria believe she was my favorite, to set this plan in motion. Forgive an old man his schemes. All my love, Grandpa. I sat in silence, the letter clutched in my hands, as the implications washed over me. $85 million. A fortune Victoria knew nothing about. A fortune that would make me wealthier than she could imagine. But why the secrecy? Why the elaborate scheme? The answer came to me slowly, as I remembered conversations with Grandpa during those quiet afternoons by his bedside. He had been concerned about Victoria's management of the family business, concerned about her relationship with Blake, whom he had never fully trusted, concerned about some of the company's recent overseas investments that Victoria had pushed for. Sometimes, he had told me once, you need a failsafe. Someone outside the system who can step in if things go wrong. I was the failsafe, the quiet piece on the chessboard that everyone underestimated until it was too late. The next morning, I went to work as usual, teaching my fourth graders about fractions and state history. But inside I felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the weight of my secret. Victoria might have the company and the mansion, but I had Grandpa's trust. And soon, I would have the means to protect his legacy if necessary. For the next several weeks, I maintained my routine. I taught my classes, attended my book club, and occasionally ran into distant family members, who treated me with the same mixture of pity and awkward sympathy they always had. The unsuccessful granddaughter, the family disappointment. Victoria, meanwhile, wasted no time asserting her control over Winters Global. The business pages featured glowing profiles of the dynamic young CEO breathing new life into her grandfather's stagnant empire. She gave interviews criticizing Grandpa's old-fashioned management style and praising her own bold vision. Each time I saw her name in print, each time I heard colleagues discussing the brilliant Victoria Winters Hamilton, I bit my tongue. Patience, Grandpa had counseled. Discretion. 50 days after the reading of the will, I received a text from Victoria that made my blood run cold. Found something interesting in Grandpa's study. We should talk. Dinner tomorrow? My place. 7 p.m. My heart raced. Had she discovered something about the account? About Grandpa's plans for me? I couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion. I'll be there, I texted back. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I had decided. I would contact the Swiss banker immediately, ahead of Grandpa's timeline. Better to secure what I could now than risk losing everything. The banker, a Mr. Reinhardt, was surprisingly accommodating despite my early inquiry. Yes, Miss Winters, we have been expecting your call, though perhaps not quite this soon. Your grandfather was most explicit in his instructions. Is everything in order? I asked carefully. Indeed. The process is nearly complete. Given the circumstances, I believe we can expedite the final transfers. By this time tomorrow, you will have full access to the accounts. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, Mr. Reinhardt. There is one more thing, he added. Your grandfather left a package in our custody. He instructed that it be delivered to you upon assumption of the account. Where shall we send it? I gave him my address, wondering what other surprises Grandpa had planned. That evening, I arrived at Victoria's mansion, my grandfather's house, where I had spent so many happy childhood summers, feeling like an intruder. The butler showed me to the dining room, where Victoria sat alone at the head of the mahogany table that could seat 20. Katherine, she greeted me, raising a glass of wine. So glad you could make it. Blake is away on business, so it's just us girls tonight. I took the seat she indicated, noting that she had placed me far down the table, emphasizing the distance between us in every sense. You said you found something in Grandpa's study? I asked, declining the wine the butler offered. Victoria smiled, that same calculated smile I'd seen all my life. Direct as always, Katherine. No small talk, no catching up. She sighed dramatically. Fine. Yes, I found something. Interesting. She produced a folder and slid it across the polished wood toward me. Inside was a bank statement. From a Swiss bank. My heart stopped. Care to explain? Victoria asked, her voice dangerously soft. I opened the folder with shaking hands. But as I scanned the document, confusion replaced fear. This wasn't the account Grandpa had mentioned. The amounts were wrong, the dates were wrong, and most importantly, the name was wrong. This is an account in Blake's name, I said slowly. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. Don't play dumb, Katherine. I know Grandpa set up accounts for you. Secret accounts. Just like this one he apparently set up for my husband. Realization dawned on me. Victoria hadn't discovered my inheritance. She had discovered that Blake had a secret Swiss account, presumably funded by our grandfather, and she thought I might know something about it. I don't know anything about this, I said truthfully. Liar! Victoria slammed her hand on the table, wine sloshing in her glass. Grandpa always confided in you. All those hours you spent reading to him, playing chess with him, he must have told you something. I shook my head. He never mentioned anything about Blake having a separate account. Victoria studied my face, searching for deceit. Finding none, her shoulders slumped slightly. $10 million, she said quietly. That's what Grandpa gave Blake behind my back. Why would he do that? What was he playing at? I chose my words carefully. Maybe he wanted to ensure Blake had his own security, independent of the family business. Or maybe, Victoria's eyes narrowed, he was trying to drive a wedge between us. Maybe he never approved of our marriage after all. I remained silent. Victoria had always been quick to see conspiracies against her, even from those who loved her most. "What else did he tell you?" she demanded. "What other secrets was he keeping?" "Nothing," I lied, feeling the weight of my own secret. "We mostly talked about books and his childhood. He liked reminiscing." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Books. Always with the books. You know, he asked for you in those final days." "Not me. You." This was news to me. "I didn't know that." "Of course you didn't. I never told you he was asking." Her smile was knife-sharp. "Consider it payback for all the times you were his favorite growing up." The cruelty of it, denying a dying man the company he asked for out of pure jealousy, took my breath away. "You kept me from seeing him when he was asking for me?" "Don't look so shocked, Katherine. We've been competing for attention our whole lives. I finally won. The company, the house, everything." Quote. She gestured around at the opulent dining room. "You got some dusty old books and fishing rods. I'd say that makes us even." I stood up, unable to stomach another minute in her presence. "I should go." "Yes, you should." Victoria didn't rise. "And Katherine, if you do know anything about any other accounts Grandpa might have set up, now would be the time to tell me. Things could get unpleasant otherwise." It was a threat, thinly veiled. I met her gaze steadily. "I have nothing to tell you, Victoria." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "You know I'll find out if you're lying." "I always do." Outside in the cool evening air, I took several deep breaths to steady myself. Victoria was suspicious, but she was looking in the wrong direction. She thought Grandpa had been setting up separate accounts for people behind her back, which he had, but not in the way she imagined. The next morning, a courier delivered a small package from Switzerland. Inside was a USB drive and another letter from Grandpa. "Katherine," this one read, "if you're reading this, then the accounts have been transferred and you're now a very wealthy woman. But wealth alone isn't why I've done this. On this drive, you'll find evidence of something troubling. Victoria and Blake have been using company funds to make investments in certain foreign enterprises that skirt international sanctions. These dealings could bring down the entire company, and with it, the livelihoods of thousands of employees." I plugged the drive into my laptop with trembling hands. Document after document appeared: emails, transfers, meeting minutes, all pointing to a pattern of deliberate financial misconduct orchestrated by Victoria and Blake. "I discovered this too late to address it myself." Grandpa's letter continued. "My health was already failing, so I created a contingency plan. You. With the resources I've provided, you can step in and prevent disaster. Not for Victoria's sake, but for the company's. For all the people who depend on it for their livelihoods." The letter ended with detailed instructions on how to proceed, legal teams to contact, regulatory bodies to approach, evidence to present. That afternoon, as I was still processing everything, my phone rang. It was Mr. Fitzgerald, sounding agitated. "Miss Katherine, I thought you should know. Victoria has filed a petition to have your grandfather's will invalidated. She's claiming he was not of sound mind when he executed it." "What? That's absurd." "Yes, well," he coughed uncomfortably, "she's also named you specifically, alleging that you exerted undue influence on him during those reading sessions." My grip tightened on the phone. "That's a lie." "I know that, and I believe any court would see through it as well. But Victoria has considerable resources at her disposal. She can make this very difficult for you." "Why would she do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "She got everything in the will." "Not quite everything," Mr. Fitzgerald said carefully. "She's discovered that your grandfather's personal effects include several journals that apparently contain some sensitive information about the company's operations." "The journals? Of course." Grandpa had always kept meticulous records of his thoughts and observations. If he had discovered Victoria and Blake's illicit dealings, he might well have documented them there. "When is the hearing?" I asked. "Next week. Tuesday at 9 a.m. I'll be there." I hung up and sat heavily on my couch, surrounded by the books my grandfather had left me, Books we had discussed during those precious final months. Books about justice, about courage, about doing what's right even when it's hard. Victoria thought she was moving against me, but in reality, she was walking into the trap Grandpa had set. A trap that would spring in exactly 5 days, when I would have full legal control of $85 million and a USB drive full of evidence that could bring her carefully constructed world crashing down. The chess game was entering its final phase. Victoria thought she had me in check. She had no idea I was about to call checkmate. The morning of the court hearing arrived, with the golden light of early autumn streaming through my bedroom window. I laid out my outfit, a conservative navy suit, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and low-heeled pumps polished to a shine. Not flashy like Victoria would wear, but dignified. Professional. The kind of outfit that said I took this seriously. As I fastened the pearls, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Fitzgerald. "Be prepared. Victoria's bringing reinforcements." I took a deep breath and texted back. "So am I." Last night, the final transfer had completed. This morning, I had confirmed with Mr. Reinhardt that I now had full legal control of $85 million. I had also contacted Caroline Chen, a former law school classmate who had gone on to become one of the city's most respected corporate attorneys. Unlike me, she had stayed the course, making partner by 30. When I explained the situation, she agreed to represent me immediately. Katherine, she had said, "This isn't just about inheritance, this is about fraud, potentially international sanctions violations. We need to be ready for anything." Now, as I walked up the courthouse steps, I spotted Victoria immediately. She stood at the top like a queen holding court, surrounded by a team of expensive-looking lawyers. Blake hovered nearby, his usual smooth confidence replaced by a nervous energy as he checked his phone repeatedly. Victoria's eyes narrowed when she saw me approaching alone. "Where's your legal team, Katherine? Or could you not afford one on a teacher's salary?" I smiled politely. "Good morning to you too, Victoria." Her perfect features arranged themselves into a practiced look of concern. "Katherine, it's not too late to drop this. Contesting the will is pointless. You'll just embarrass yourself." "I'm not the one contesting the will," I replied evenly. "That would be you." Victoria laughed, the sound echoing off the marble columns. "A technicality. I'm simply ensuring Grandpa's true wishes are respected. We both know he wasn't thinking clearly in those final months." Before I could respond, Caroline arrived, trailing her own team of associates carrying briefcases and document boxes. Victoria's smirk faltered as she took in the prestigious firm's name emblazoned on their leather portfolios. "Sorry I'm late," Caroline said, extending her hand to me. "Traffic was horrible. Shall we go in?" Victoria stared at Caroline, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You're Caroline Chen. Harrison and Meyer. How are you?" She stopped herself, but the question hung in the air. "How are you affording this?" Caroline smiled pleasantly. "Let's not keep the judge waiting." Inside the courtroom, Victoria's team took position on one side, while Caroline and I settled on the other. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, entered and called the court to order. Victoria's lead attorney rose first. "Your Honor, we're here today because we have reason to believe that Charles Winters was not of sound mind when he executed his will. We have affidavits from Mr. Winters, doctors indicating that he was on strong pain medication that could have impaired his judgment." "And the undue influence claim?" the judge asked, reviewing the documents. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe that Katherine Winters took advantage of her grandfather's weakened state, spending excessive time alone with him, isolating him from other family members, and potentially manipulating him regarding his estate planning." My hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Caroline placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Your Honor," Victoria's attorney continued, "we also have concerns about certain personal effects that passed to Katherine Winters under the will, specifically, a collection of journals that contain sensitive proprietary information about Winters' global enterprises. As the CEO and controlling shareholder, Mrs. Winters Hamilton has the right to protect company interests. The judge turned to Caroline. Counselor. Caroline stood, elegant and composed. Your Honor, these allegations are not only false but represent a transparent attempt by Victoria Winters Hamilton to gain control over property rightfully bequeathed to my client. We have statements from Charles Winters, primary physician, confirming that while he was physically frail, his mental faculties remained sharp until the end. She produced a folder of documents. As for the undue influence claim, we have visitor logs from the nursing staff, showing that Ms. Winters visited her grandfather regularly throughout his illness, while Mrs. Winters Hamilton's visits were infrequent at best. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Regarding the journals, Caroline continued, they were Mr. Winters' personal property, and he chose to leave them to Katherine. If they happened to contain observations about the company he founded, that was his prerogative. The judge nodded thoughtfully. I see. And what is your client's position on these journals? Caroline glanced at me, and I nodded. We had discussed this strategy. Your Honor, my client has no objection to the court reviewing the journals in camera to determine if they contain anything that might legitimately harm Winters Global's interests. However, we believe what Mrs. Winters Hamilton is truly concerned about is not proprietary information, but rather evidence of financial misconduct. Quote, Victoria's attorney jumped to his feet. Objection! That's an outrageous accusation with no basis in… Sit down, the judge said firmly. Ms. Chen, that's quite a claim. Do you have evidence to support it? We do, Your Honor. Caroline nodded to one of her associates, who approached with a sealed envelope. This USB drive contains documentation of numerous transactions orchestrated by Victoria Winters Hamilton and her husband Blake Hamilton that appear to violate international sanctions laws. The courtroom erupted. Victoria's face drained of color. Blake stood abruptly and whispered urgently to their attorney. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Order! The judge banged her gavel. I want to see counsel in my chambers immediately. Court is in recess for 1 hour. As the judge left the bench, Victoria lunged toward me, her perfect composure shattered. What have you done? She hissed. Caroline stepped between us. Mrs. Winters Hamilton, I suggest you consult with your attorney before saying anything further. Victoria's eyes burned with fury. You think you've won? This isn't over, Katherine. Not by a long shot. Blake pulled her back, his face ashen. Victoria? Not here, he muttered, glancing nervously at the court reporter who was still present. During the recess, I sat alone in a quiet corner of the courthouse corridor, my heart pounding. This was moving faster than I had anticipated. Caroline had warned me that once we presented the evidence, things could escalate quickly. Katherine. The voice startled me. It was Lyle Carver, my grandfather's longtime personal assistant. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. Lyle? What are you doing here? He glanced around nervously. I needed to see this through. Your grandfather? He told me what he was planning. Not everything, but enough. My eyes widened. You knew? About the account? Yes. I helped him set it up decades ago, before Victoria was even born. He lowered his voice. He always knew she had a darkness in her, even as a child. But he loved her anyway, tried to guide her. When that failed, he prepared for this day. Why are you telling me this now? Lyle sighed. Because you should know you're not alone. There are people at Winters Global, good people, who have been watching Victoria and Blake with growing concern. People who would support new leadership. Before I could respond, Caroline returned, her expression serious. Katherine, we need to talk. The judge wants to see the journals immediately. When court resumed, the atmosphere was tense. The judge looked grim as she took her seat. Having reviewed the evidence presented, she began. I find that there are serious questions regarding the management of Winters Global Enterprises, that extend beyond the scope of today's probate hearing. I am referring the financial documentation to the appropriate regulatory authorities for further investigation. Victoria's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a look. As for the matter before this court, she continued, I find no evidence that Charles Winters was of unsound mind when executing his will, nor that Katherine Winters exerted any undue influence. The will stands as written. I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me. However, the judge added, given the sensitive nature of some of the information contained in Mr. Winters' journals, I am ordering that they remain sealed for 30 days pending a full review by an independent examiner. Victoria's attorney stood. Your Honor, in light of these developments, my client would like to withdraw her petition to invalidate the will. Too late, the judge replied curtly. This court has already ruled. And given the serious nature of the financial improprieties alleged, I am also issuing a temporary restraining order, preventing Mrs. Winters Hamilton and Mr. Hamilton from making any major decisions regarding Winters Global Enterprises without court approval until this matter is resolved. Victoria's face contorted with rage. Blake placed a restraining hand on her arm, but she shook it off. This is absurd, she exclaimed. I am the CEO. I own controlling interest. Mrs. Winters Hamilton, the judge said severely, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. This hearing is adjourned. As we filed out of the courtroom, reporters who had gotten wind of the drama pressed forward with questions. Caroline expertly deflected them, guiding me toward a side exit. Outside, in the courthouse plaza, Victoria cornered me, her eyes wild with fury. Blake and her attorneys hovered anxiously nearby. How? She demanded. How did you get those documents? Who helped you? I met her gaze steadily. Grandpa did. She laughed, the sound brittle with disbelief. Grandpa? He could barely use email. He didn't know what we were doing. He knew more than you think, I replied quietly. He was watching you the whole time. Those reading sessions you mocked? We discussed everything, including your creative financing in countries under sanction. Victoria's face paled. You're bluffing. You couldn't possibly. The Cayman account? I said. The shell companies in Liechtenstein? The commodities trading through third parties in sanctioned countries? He knew it all, Victoria. He was just waiting to see how far you'd go. Blake stepped forward, his usual polish giving way to desperation. Katherine, please. We can work something out. Whatever you want. Money, a position in the company, anything. I shook my head. This isn't about what I want. It's about what's right. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Since when do you care about the company? You walked away from the family business years ago. I walked away from corporate law. I corrected her. Not from our family's legacy. Not from the thousands of employees who depend on Winters Global for their livelihoods. Oh, spare me the sanctimonious lecture. Victoria spat. You're enjoying this. You've always been jealous of me, and now you think you've found a way to take everything I've built. Everything you've built? I echoed incredulously. Victoria, you've been systematically dismantling what Grandpa spent his life creating. You've put the entire company at risk with these illegal schemes. They're not illegal, she insisted. They're aggressive. There's a difference. Tell that to the federal prosecutors, Caroline interjected smoothly. I'm sure they'll appreciate the distinction. Victoria turned on her. You. Who's paying you? Katherine can't afford your hourly rate on a teacher's salary. Caroline smiled enigmatically. My client's finances are not your concern, Mrs. Winters Hamilton. Actually, they are, Victoria insisted, turning back to me. Where did you get the money for all this, Katherine? What aren't you telling me? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I hesitated, then decided the time for secrets had passed. Grandpa left me more than books and fishing rods, Victoria, much more. Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. No, he wouldn't. Everything was supposed to come to me. Everything. Not everything, I said softly. Just the visible assets. The company, the house. The things you always cared about most. How much? She demanded, her voice barely controlled. How much did he hide from me? I met her gaze directly. $85 million. The color drained from Victoria's face. Blake steadied her as she swayed slightly. Impossible, she whispered. There's no way he had that kind of money outside the company. He was more cautious than you gave him credit for, I replied. He built a safety net decades ago, and over time, it grew. Victoria's shock gave way to fresh anger. And he gave it all to you? His least accomplished grandchild? The one who couldn't even finish law school? The one who values people over profit? I corrected her. The one who reads to dying old men instead of checking stock prices. The one who wouldn't risk prison to increase quarterly earnings. Victoria's lawyer intervened, pulling her aside for an urgent whispered conference. Blake followed, throwing anxious glances in my direction. Caroline touched my arm. We should go. Your statement to the SEC is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and we need to prepare. As we walked away, Victoria called after me, her voice cracking. This isn't over, Katherine. I'll fight you for every penny. I turned back one last time. It's not about the money, Victoria. It never was. That evening, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to process everything that had happened. The evidence against Victoria and Blake was damning. The regulatory investigation would likely lead to criminal charges. Winters Global, the company my grandfather had built from nothing, faced an uncertain future. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Katherine Winters? A man's voice, unfamiliar. Yes, who's this? My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm the head of the board's audit committee at Winters Global. I understand there were some developments in court today. I sat up straighter. That's right. The board is convening an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. We'd like you to attend. Me? Why? Because Charles Winters trusted you, he said simply. And right now, the company needs someone it can trust. After I hung up, I sat for a long time looking at the photographs on my wall. Grandpa and me on his sailboat, Grandpa teaching me chess. Grandpa at my college graduation, his face beaming with pride. I wish you were here, I whispered to his image. I don't know if I can do this. But I knew what he would say. He would remind me that the most important moves in chess are often the quietest ones. That patience and integrity ultimately win more battles than aggression and deceit. That sometimes, the person least hungry for power is the one who should hold it. The next morning, I arrived at Winters Global headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of downtown. The security guards recognized me immediately. One even smiled and said, "Welcome home, Miss Winters." The boardroom was on the top floor with panoramic views of the city. As I entered, 12 pairs of eyes turned to assess me. The board members, mostly older men who had worked with my grandfather, with a few younger faces mixed in, regarded me with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Daniel Reeves, a distinguished man in his 60s, rose to greet me. Thank you for coming, Ms. Winters. Katherine, please, I said, shaking his hand. Katherine. Please, have a seat. I took the chair he indicated, aware of the symbolism. It was at the head of the table, my grandfather's old position. As you know, Reeves began, the company is facing a crisis. The allegations against Victoria and Blake Hamilton are extremely serious. If proven true, they could result in criminal charges, massive fines, and irreparable damage to our reputation. Murmurs of agreement around the table. The board has voted unanimously to suspend Victoria from her position as CEO, effective immediately. He continued, but that leaves us with a leadership vacuum at a critical moment. I nodded, wondering where this was heading. Your grandfather always spoke highly of you. Another board member, Janet Wilson, interjected. He said you had the moral compass the company would need someday. I'm flattered, I replied carefully, but I'm not a business person. I'm a teacher. You're also a trained lawyer. Reeves pointed out. "And more importantly, you're a Winters. You understand what this company stands for? What it's supposed to stand for?" "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Reeves exchanged glances with the others. "We'd like you to step in as interim CEO while we navigate this crisis." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious," Janet Wilson confirmed. "The company needs a steady hand right now. Someone who can restore trust with our employees, our shareholders, and the regulatory authorities." "But I haven't worked in corporate America in years," I protested. "I know nothing about running a global enterprise." "You'll have the entire executive team to handle day-to-day operations," Reeves assured me. "What we need from you is ethical leadership and a connection to Charles Winters' vision." I looked around the table at these people who had worked alongside my grandfather for years. They seemed sincere in their concern for the company's future. "There's something else you should know," I said finally. "I have recently come into a significant inheritance from my grandfather. A separate account he established, containing approximately $85 million. Eyebrows raised around the table. "We're aware," Reeves said, surprising me. "Charles told me about it before he passed. He said it was his insurance policy, a way to ensure that someone with both the moral authority and the financial independence could step in if necessary." "He planned all this," I murmured, more to myself than to the board. "Your grandfather was always thinking several moves ahead," Janet Wilson said with a small smile. "Much like you used to do when you played chess with him." The reference caught me off guard. "You knew about our chess games?" "Charles talked about them often," she replied. "He said you were the only person who could occasionally beat him." I felt a lump forming in my throat. All those years, while Victoria had been positioning herself as the heir apparent, Grandpa had been quietly preparing for this moment. Preparing me, though I hadn't realized it. "I'll need time to consider this," I said finally. "Of course," Reeves nodded, "but not too much time. The news about Victoria will break tomorrow, and we need to present a unified front." As I left the boardroom, my mind was racing. Could I really do this? Take over the company I had walked away from years ago? Step into my grandfather's shoes? Victoria's shoes. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and I found myself walking down the corridor toward what had been my grandfather's office, then Victoria's. The nameplate already read, "Katherine Winters, Interim CEO." They had been so certain I would say yes. Inside, the office had been transformed from the warm, book-lined sanctuary of my grandfather's day to Victoria's minimalist showcase of modern art and designer furniture. Nothing of Grandpa remained except the view, the city spread out below, the river winding through it, the mountains in the distance. I stood at the window, remembering how he used to lift me up as a child to see the tiny cars below. "One day," he'd say, "all of this will be in good hands." I hadn't realized then that he meant my hands. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Lyle, my grandfather's assistant. "I heard the news," he said. "The board asked you to step in." I nodded. "I haven't decided yet." "If I may," he said hesitantly, "there's something your grandfather asked me to give you if this day ever came." He handed me a small brass key. His private safe. Behind the portrait in the study at the house. "Victoria's house now," I reminded him. "Not for long, I suspect," Lyle replied dryly. "The court has already frozen their assets pending investigation." That evening, with permission from the court-appointed receiver, I entered my grandfather's house, the home where I had spent so many happy childhood summers. It felt strange to walk those halls now, knowing that Victoria had been forced to leave just hours before. In the study, I found the portrait Lyle had mentioned, a landscape of the mountain retreat where Grandpa had taught me to fish. Behind it, just as he'd said, was a small wall safe. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a single envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. My third letter from beyond the grave. "My dearest Katherine, it began. If you're reading this, then the board has approached you about taking over the company, and events have unfolded much as I feared they might. I settled into his old leather chair, the one Victoria had banished to this room when she redecorated the main office. You're doubting yourself right now, the letter continued, as if he could see me across time. Wondering if you're qualified, if you're ready, if this is what you really want. But Katherine, qualifications can be learned. Readiness is a choice. And as for what you want, well, sometimes what we need to do transcends our wants. Tears filled my eyes as I read on. Winters Global isn't just a company. It's a legacy of trust. Trust from employees who depend on ethical leadership. Trust from communities where we operate. Trust from customers who use our products. Victoria never understood that. She saw only power and profit. I thought of all the people whose livelihoods depended on the company, thousands of employees worldwide, their families, the communities built around our operations. You walked away from corporate law because you couldn't reconcile its values with your own, Grandpa wrote. I respected that choice. But now I'm asking you to walk back in, not to compromise your values, but to restore them to a place where they've been forgotten. The final paragraph made me catch my breath. Chess taught you patience, strategy, and sacrifice. Teaching taught you empathy, communication, and leadership. Both prepared you for this moment. Victoria always thought she was competing with you for my favor, but there was never any competition. Not because I loved her less, but because you were always the one who understood what really matters. Take care of my company, Katherine. Take care of our people. And remember, the most powerful piece on the board is the one everyone underestimates. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Through the study window, I could see the lights of the city flickering on as dusk settled. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably plotting her next move, furious at having lost the company, the house, perhaps soon her freedom. But this wasn't about Victoria anymore. It wasn't even about me. It was about the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me, not just $85 million, but the responsibility to lead with integrity. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Reeves. Decision? I took a deep breath and typed my response. I'll do it. Press conference tomorrow at 9. Then I sat back in my grandfather's chair and whispered to the empty room. Checkmate. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and bright. I stood at my apartment window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since 5 a.m., reporters seeking comments, board members offering last-minute advice, even old law school classmates who had somehow heard the news. Katherine Winters to assume control of Winters Global, the business headlines proclaimed. The articles varied in tone, from curious to skeptical to outright doubtful. One particularly cutting piece questioned whether a, quote, schoolteacher with no executive experience could possibly lead one of the country's largest corporations through its biggest crisis. I took a deep breath and set down my coffee. They didn't know what I knew. They hadn't read my grandfather's letters. They hadn't seen the evidence of Victoria and Blake's financial schemes. And they certainly didn't know about the quiet strength I had inherited from the man who had built this company from nothing. My outfit was laid out on the bed, a tailored charcoal suit with a silk blouse in the company's signature blue, professional but not ostentatious. Nothing like Victoria's designer power suits that cost more than my monthly rent. I was determined to set a different tone from day one. As I dressed, I rehearsed the speech I had prepared with the PR team overnight. It needed to be honest about the challenges ahead without tanking the company's stock further. It needed to reassure employees without making promises I couldn't keep. And it needed to draw a clear line between Victoria's leadership and mine, without appearing vindictive or petty. My phone rang. Caroline Chen, my attorney and now friend. "Are you ready?" she asked without preamble. "As I'll ever be," I replied, fastening my grandmother's pearl earrings, my talisman for important days. "The SEC investigators will be watching the press conference closely," she warned. "Stick to the statement we prepared. Don't elaborate or speculate, especially about the ongoing investigation." "Understood." "And Katherine?" Her voice softened. You've got this. Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he chose you. 45 minutes later, I walked through the revolving doors of Winters Global headquarters. The lobby buzzed with activity. Security personnel checking credentials, PR staff directing media to the conference room, employees huddled in corners whispering urgently. Lyle met me at the elevator, his familiar presence calming my nerves. The board is assembled upstairs. They'd like a few minutes before the press conference. As we rode up, he handed me a small package. Your grandfather asked me to give you this today. He was very specific about the timing. Inside was a simple silver pin in the shape of a chess piece, a queen. I fastened it to my lapel, touching it briefly for luck. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. Daniel Reeves rose to greet me, extending his hand. Katherine, thank you for stepping up in this difficult moment. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you for your trust, Mr. Reeves. Daniel, please, he insisted. We're going to be working closely together. The other board members offered similar greetings. Some warm, some reserved, all curious about what kind of leader I would be. Before we face the press, Reeves said, we want to be clear about expectations. This company is facing unprecedented challenges. The investigation into Victoria and Blake's activities will be disruptive. Shareholders are nervous. Employees are confused. I understand, I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table. My grandfather's seat, then Victoria's, now mine. What's your plan? Asked Janet Wilson bluntly. All eyes turned to me. This was the first test of my leadership. Not the press conference, but this moment, facing the skepticism of seasoned business leaders who had every reason to doubt me. First, complete transparency, I began. With investigators, with employees, with shareholders. We open the books entirely. If there are other questionable transactions beyond what we already know, we find them ourselves and disclose them. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Second, we separate the company completely from Victoria and Blake's personal legal issues. We cooperate fully with authorities while making it clear that their actions do not reflect the values of Winters Global. Nods around the table. Quote, third, we review every international contract and partnership with particular attention to sanctioned regions. Any arrangement that even approaches an ethical gray area gets terminated immediately, regardless of the financial impact. That could cost us millions, one board member objected. And trying to defend the indefensible could cost us everything. I countered. My grandfather built this company on trust. We're going to rebuild it the same way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Reeves leaned forward. And what about the day-to-day operations? You don't have experience running a corporation of this size. You're right, I acknowledged. Which is why I'll be relying heavily on the executive team's expertise while I get up to speed. I don't pretend to know everything about this business, but I do know right from wrong, and that's what the company needs most right now. A silence fell over the room. Then Janet Wilson smiled slightly. Charles would have said exactly the same thing. 10 minutes later, I stood at the podium in the company's press room, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. The lights were blinding, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. I spotted Caroline in the back, giving me an encouraging nod. Good morning, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. For those who don't know me, I'm Katherine Winters, granddaughter of Charles Winters, who founded this company 63 years ago. As of yesterday, I have been appointed interim CEO of Winters Global Enterprises. I paused, letting the cameras capture the moment. I come to this role at a challenging time. As you may know, my sister Victoria Winters Hamilton and her husband Blake Hamilton have been suspended from their positions pending an investigation into potential financial misconduct. I want to be clear. Winters Global is cooperating fully with all regulatory authorities. We have nothing to hide. Flashbulbs popped as reporters scribbled notes. Some of you may be wondering why the board has chosen me, an elementary school teacher with no corporate experience, to lead this company through such a difficult period. The answer is simple. I share my grandfather's vision for what this company should be. A place of integrity. A place that values people over profits. A place that does business the right way, even when the right way isn't the easy way. I touched the queen pin on my lapel briefly before continuing. In the coming weeks, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of all our operations worldwide. We will be transparent about what we find. We will make whatever changes are necessary to ensure that Winters Global not only survives this crisis, but emerges stronger, more ethical, and more committed than ever to the values on which it was founded. The questions afterward were predictably pointed. How much had I known about Victoria's activities? What qualified me to run a global corporation? Was I just a figurehead while the board managed the real crisis? I answered each as honestly as I could, without compromising the ongoing investigation. When one reporter asked bluntly, "Isn't this just a family power struggle playing out in public?" I took a moment before responding. "This isn't about family dynamics," I said carefully. "This is about right and wrong, about legal versus illegal, about the thousands of people whose livelihoods depend on this company operating with integrity. If you're looking for a soap opera, you'll need to look elsewhere." As the press conference concluded, I caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the room. Blake Hamilton, my brother-in-law, standing alone, watching me intently. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and slipped out the door. "What was Blake doing here?" I asked Caroline as we left the press room. "Testing the waters, probably," she replied grimly. "Seeing how much you know, how much you're willing to say publicly. Where's Victoria?" "Under house arrest at their condo." The court determined she was a flight risk after they found evidence she had been transferring funds to accounts in non-extradition countries. I shook my head, trying to imagine my sister wearing an ankle monitor in her luxury penthouse. And Blake? Cooperating with investigators, from what I hear, looking to cut a deal. He'd turn on Victoria? Despite everything, the thought shocked me. Caroline gave me a knowing look. When facing federal charges with potential jail time, even the strongest marriages get tested. Back in what was now my office, I spent the afternoon in back-to-back meetings with department heads, trying to get a crash course in the business my grandfather had built and my sister had nearly destroyed. The complexity was overwhelming. International supply chains, currency hedging strategies, regulatory compliance across dozens of countries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By evening, my head was spinning with information. As the executive floor emptied for the day, I remained at my desk, surrounded by reports and briefing documents, determined to absorb as much as possible before tomorrow. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reading. I looked up to see Lyle. "You should go home, Katherine," he said gently. "It's past 9. I glanced at my watch in surprise. I lost track of time. "Your grandfather used to do the same thing," he said with a small smile. "He'd get so absorbed in a problem that he'd forget to eat, forget to sleep." "I have so much to learn," I admitted, gesturing at the stacks of reports. "And you will," he assured me. "But not all in one night." As he turned to go, a thought struck me. "Lyle, how long did you work for my grandfather?" 42 years, he replied. "Started as his driver when I was just out of college. Worked my way up to personal assistant." "And in all that time, what was the biggest crisis he faced?" Lyle considered the question. "There were many. The oil embargo in the 70s nearly bankrupted us. The tech crash in 2001 wiped out a third of our value overnight. But if you're asking what kept him up at night..." He paused. "It was always the fear of losing his way, of compromising his principles for profit." "Did he ever?" "Compromise, I mean." "Not knowingly." Lyle's eyes met mine. "That's why Victoria's actions would have broken his heart. Not the legal trouble, not the financial risk, but the betrayal of everything he stood for." After Lyle left, I sat alone in the growing darkness, thinking about legacy and betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." B. Blake. I hesitated, then typed back. About? The response came immediately. Victoria doesn't know what I know. Meet me tomorrow, 7 a.m. The diner on 12th. I showed the texts to Caroline first thing the next morning. She frowned deeply. It's a trap, she declared. He's probably wearing a wire, trying to get you to say something incriminating. What could I possibly say that would incriminate me? I asked. I haven't done anything wrong. Neither have most people who get caught in perjury traps, she pointed out. Look, Blake is desperate. Victoria is under house arrest. They're facing serious charges. He'll say or do anything to improve his position. Or maybe he genuinely has information. I countered. Something that could help us understand the full extent of what they've been doing. Caroline sighed. If you're determined to meet him, I'm coming with you. And we say nothing, absolutely nothing, about the ongoing investigation. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived. Just a few early morning commuters hunched over coffee and eggs. Blake sat in a corner booth, looking nothing like the polished executive I was used to seeing. His expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a rumpled button-down. His face was haggard, with several days' worth of stubble. You brought a lawyer, he observed as we slid into the booth across from him. You're facing federal charges, I replied evenly. Of course I brought a lawyer, he nodded, conceding the point. I'm not wearing a wire, if that's what you're worried about. And I'm not here to trap you. I'm here because… He faltered. Because I need to make this right somehow. By turning on Victoria? I asked. His eyes flashed with momentary anger. By telling the truth. Victoria wasn't the mastermind behind all this. She wasn't even the one who started it. Then who was? Blake looked down at his untouched coffee. Your grandfather. I stared at him in disbelief. That's absurd. Is it? He leaned forward. How do you think Winters Global survived the sanctions placed on certain countries after the Cold War? How do you think we maintained supply chains during embargoes? Charles Winters was a master at finding workarounds. Legal workarounds? I insisted. Sometimes legal, sometimes? He shrugged. Gray area. But he was careful, cautious. He set up structures decades ago that operated in the shadows of the main company. Victoria discovered them when she took over, and instead of shutting them down, she expanded them. I finished, pieces starting to click into place. Took what might have been technically legal loopholes and pushed them into clearly illegal territory. Blake nodded. She saw it as continuing his legacy, being bold where he had been cautious. Caroline, who had been silent until now, spoke up. And your role in all this? I handled the financial end, Blake admitted. Created the shell companies, managed the accounts. At first I told myself it was just aggressive business strategy. By the time I realized we had crossed serious lines, I was in too deep to back out. Why are you telling us this? I asked. Because the investigators are going to find it all eventually, he said wearily. And when they do, they'll paint Charles as the architect of a decades-long fraud. His reputation will be destroyed. Is that what you want? I felt sick at the thought. Of course not. Then we need to control the narrative, Blake insisted. Limit the damage to Victoria and me. Protect the company. Protect Charles's legacy. Caroline's eyes narrowed. And in exchange for helping us, control the narrative. What do you want? Leniency, Blake said simply. I'll provide everything. Accounts, contacts, transaction histories. I'll testify against Victoria if necessary. In return, I want a plea deal that keeps me out of prison. You testify against your own wife? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Blake's expression hardened. Victoria was planning to pin everything on me anyway. I found the draft statement her private attorney prepared. She was going to claim she had no knowledge of the details, that I handled all the finances and kept her in the dark. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow I was. Even knowing what Victoria was capable of, the idea that she would sacrifice her own husband to save herself was shocking. We can't promise anything regarding criminal charges, Caroline said carefully. That's up to the prosecutors. But if your information proves valuable, we could certainly communicate that to the authorities. Blake seemed to deflate slightly. It's better than nothing, I suppose. As we left the diner, I turned to Caroline. Do you believe him? About Grandpa? She considered the question. It's plausible. Many companies that operated internationally during the Cold War found creative ways to navigate sanctions. The question is whether what Charles did was actually illegal or just aggressive business strategy. And how do we find out? We look at the evidence, she said pragmatically. If Blake is telling the truth, the paper trail will show when these structures were established and how they evolved under Victoria's leadership. Back at Winters Global, I called an emergency meeting with Daniel Reeves and the head of our legal department. I shared Blake's claims without revealing the source. Is it possible? I asked bluntly. Could my grandfather have established questionable financial structures that Victoria later expanded? Reeves and the legal counsel exchanged uncomfortable glances. It's possible, Reeves admitted reluctantly. Charles was operating in a different era with different norms. What was considered acceptable business practice in the 1970s and 80s might raise eyebrows today. I need to know the truth, I insisted. All of it. No more family secrets. The next week was a blur of forensic accountants, historical document reviews, and increasingly disturbing revelations. Blake's information had opened doors we hadn't even known existed. What emerged was a complex picture of my grandfather's business practices, innovative and aggressive, occasionally skirting regulations, but generally remaining within technical legal boundaries. Victoria, however, had taken these structures and pushed them far beyond their original design, crossing bright lines into clearly illegal territory. Where my grandfather had created careful workarounds for specific business necessities, Victoria had built a parallel financial system designed to evade sanctions, launder profits, and hide assets from regulators. As we pieced together the full extent of her activities, I realized we were facing an even bigger crisis than I had initially understood. The company's very survival was at stake. On Friday afternoon, I called another board meeting. The mood was somber as I laid out what we had discovered. The good news, I concluded, is that we now have a complete picture of the problem. The bad news is that it's worse than we thought. Victoria and Blake's activities have compromised virtually every international division of the company. What are our options? Janet Wilson asked, her usual confidence shaken. I took a deep breath. Option 1. We disclose everything, cooperate fully with authorities, and accept whatever penalties are imposed. That likely means massive fines, possibly criminal charges against the company itself, and a stock price collapse that could take years to recover from. Unacceptable, one board member muttered. Option 2, I continued. We try to contain the damage by arguing that Victoria and Blake were rogue actors whose activities were unknown to the board and executive team. We sacrificed them to save the company. More viable, Reeves commented. The evidence does support that they dramatically expanded these operations without board approval. There's a third option, I said quietly. We use what we've learned to clean house completely. We voluntarily disclose everything to authorities, but we do so with a comprehensive remediation plan already in place. We identify every problematic transaction, every questionable structure, and we dismantle them ourselves before the government forces us to. The financial impact would be enormous, Reeves warned. Yes, I agreed. We'd take a significant hit, but we'd survive. And more importantly, we'd emerge as the company my grandfather always intended us to be, one built on integrity, not shortcuts. The board debate was intense. Some members argued passionately for self-preservation at all costs. Others recognized that without a complete ethical reset, the company would forever be tainted by Victoria's actions. In the end, we voted to pursue my third option. It would be painful, expensive, and risky, but it was the right thing to do. As the board members filed out, Reeves lingered behind. That was your grandfather's influence speaking today, he said softly. He would have been proud. Even though we now know he wasn't perfect either? I asked. Reeves smiled sadly. Perhaps especially because of that. Charles knew his own flaws better than anyone. He wanted better for the company than what he had sometimes been able to do himself. That night, alone in my grandfather's study in what would soon legally be my house, I found myself talking to him as if he were still there. "You weren't perfect," I said to the empty room. "You made compromises I wish you hadn't. But you knew it, didn't you? You knew your own failings, and you tried to ensure that I wouldn't repeat them." I touched the queen chess piece pin on my lapel, the one he had left for me. Queens can move in any direction, he had once taught me. They have the most freedom on the board. But with that freedom comes the greatest responsibility. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number. "Hello?" Katherine. Victoria's voice. Cold, controlled, but with an undercurrent of rage. "I hear my husband has been singing like a canary." I said nothing, waiting. "You think you've won, don't you?" she continued. The devoted granddaughter, stepping in to save the family business from the wicked sister. "This isn't about winning, Victoria. It's always been about winning with us," she snapped. "Don't pretend otherwise. Ever since we were children, it's been a competition. And now you think you've finally beaten me." "I'm trying to save Grandpa's company," I said evenly. "That's all." "His company?" She laughed bitterly. "The company he built with shortcuts and workarounds and creative financing? The methods you're now condemning me for using? There's a difference. The only difference," she cut in, "is that I got caught. That, and I didn't have $85 million in a secret account to protect me when things went wrong." I sighed. "What do you want, Victoria?" A pause. "What makes you think I want anything?" "Because you always do. That's the real difference between us. You've always wanted more money, more power, more status. I just wanted a life that meant something." "How noble," she sneered. "Tell me, St. Catherine, what will your meaningful life look like when you're done dismantling everything I built, when the stock price has tanked and thousands have lost their jobs? Will that mean something to you?" The question hit harder than I wanted to admit. "We'll rebuild," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "The right way this time." "Good luck with that," Victoria replied, her voice suddenly tired. "You'll find it's not as easy as Grandpa's letters made it sound. The real world doesn't reward integrity the way storybooks do." After she hung up, her words echoed in my mind. Was she right? Was I being naive? Idealistic? Was I risking thousands of jobs in pursuit of an ethical standard that the business world simply didn't operate by? But then I remembered the quiet strength in my grandfather's final letters, the faith he had placed in me, the legacy he had entrusted to me, not just of wealth, but of values. Victoria might be right that the path ahead would be harder than I imagined. But I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that it was the only path worth taking. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The full disclosure to authorities, the inevitable stock price drop, the media scrutiny, the painful process of rebuilding what Victoria had nearly destroyed. But tonight, in the quiet of my grandfather's study, surrounded by the books he had loved and the chess set where he had taught me that every move has consequences, I felt a profound sense of peace. The judge's ruling that had frozen Victoria's assets and placed her under house arrest was just the beginning. The true judgment, the one that mattered most, would come from how I led this company forward, from whether I could live up to the faith my grandfather had placed in me. And as I touched the queen pin on my lapel one last time before heading to bed, I made a silent promise. I would not let him down. 6 months had passed since the day I took over as interim CEO of Winters Global. 6 months of the hardest work I had ever done. 6 months of painful decisions, sleepless nights, and constant doubt. But also 6 months of rebuilding something I was growing increasingly proud of. The autumn leaves were turning golden outside my office window as I reviewed the latest quarterly report. The numbers weren't pretty. Our stock had dropped nearly 40% since our voluntary disclosure to federal authorities. 3 international divisions had been shuttered completely. Over 2,000 employees had been let go in the resulting restructuring. But there were glimmers of hope. Our core domestic operations remained profitable. The Justice Department had acknowledged our, quote, extraordinary cooperation, and indicated that criminal charges against the company itself were unlikely. And most importantly, the culture was changing. I could feel it in the way executives approached problems, in the questions employees asked during town halls, in the pride returning to people's voices when they mentioned where they worked. "You have a visitor," my assistant announced through the intercom. "Says it's important." I glanced at my calendar, seeing no appointments. "Who is it?" "A Mr. Hamilton." Blake. I hadn't seen him since that morning at the diner, though his information had proven invaluable in our internal investigation. According to Caroline, he had successfully negotiated a plea deal that would keep him out of prison in exchange for his testimony against Victoria. "Send him in," I said after a moment's hesitation. Blake looked better than he had at the diner. Clean-shaven, properly dressed, though still lacking the arrogant confidence that had once defined him. He stood awkwardly in the doorway until I gestured for him to take a seat. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," he admitted. "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied honestly. "But your information helped us. I owe you that much." He nodded, looking around the office that had once been Victoria's, noting the changes I'd made. The return of my grandfather's chess set to the corner table, the family photos on the credenza, the wall of books where Victoria had displayed modern art. "You've made it your own," he observed. "I'm trying." I leaned back in my chair. "What brings you here, Blake?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. "This, the last piece of the puzzle." "What is it?" "Victoria's private files. The ones she kept separate from everything else. The ones I wasn't supposed to know about." I raised an eyebrow. "How did you get them?" "She gave me her passwords years ago, when we first got married. She changed them regularly, but always to variations on the same theme. The date we met, her childhood dog's name, that sort of thing. It wasn't hard to figure out the pattern." "And what's on these files that's so important?" He met my gaze directly. "Evidence that exonerates your grandfather completely." My heart skipped a beat. "Explain." "Those financial structures I told you about? The ones Charles supposedly created during the Cold War?" Victoria fabricated that connection. She created the paper trail herself, backdated documents, forged signatures. She wanted insurance in case she ever got caught, a way to claim she was just continuing established company practice. I felt a surge of both relief and rage. She framed our grandfather? Made it look like he started the illegal operations that she was actually running? Blake nodded grimly. She didn't trust anyone, not even me. These files show how methodically she constructed the false narrative. The real offshore structures were entirely her creation, started within months of taking over as CEO. I stared at the flash drive, this small object that could restore my grandfather's reputation completely. "Why are you giving me this?" Blake looked down. "Partial atonement, I suppose. I was complicit in a lot of what Victoria did. I looked the other way when I should have spoken up. I convinced myself it was just aggressive business strategy." He sighed. "But framing Charles? That crossed a line even for me. He was good to both of us. He didn't deserve to have his legacy tarnished." I picked up the flash drive carefully. "This could affect your plea deal, you know. If prosecutors learn you withheld evidence." "I know." He stood up. "Consider it my last contribution to cleaning up the mess we made." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Blake, thank you." He paused at the door. "Don't thank me, Katherine. Just make the company what Charles believed it could be." After Blake left, I immediately called Caroline and our head of legal counsel. Within hours, our forensic team had verified the authenticity of the files. They were comprehensive, damning, and exactly what Blake had described, a carefully constructed fraud designed to implicate my grandfather in Victoria's crimes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The revelation changed everything. Not just for my grandfather's legacy, but for the company's legal position. By the end of the week, we had submitted the new evidence to federal prosecutors, who revised their assessment of the case dramatically. Victoria now faced additional charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice, while the company's position improved significantly. I decided to share the news with the entire company in an all-hands meeting. Standing on the auditorium stage, looking out at thousands of faces, some in person, others joining virtually from offices around the world, I felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. 6 months ago, I began, I stood before many of you as a complete outsider, a school teacher suddenly thrust into a corporate crisis. You had every reason to doubt me. Many of you did, and I don't blame you for that. I took a breath, scanning the sea of attentive faces. Since then, we've been through a difficult journey together. We've had to confront ugly truths about how parts of this company were operating. We've had to make painful cuts. We've had to rebuild trust with regulators, with customers, with each other. Nods throughout the audience. Today I want to share some news that, while it doesn't erase those challenges, helps put them in proper perspective. New evidence has emerged that completely exonerates my grandfather, Charles Winters, from any involvement in the illegal financial schemes that were uncovered. These operations were not, as previously believed, expansions of structures he created. They were entirely new constructions, designed to appear as though they had historical precedent. A murmur ran through the crowd. Why does this matter? Because it reinforces what I've believed all along, that this company was founded on principles of integrity, that the ethical shortcuts we discovered were not baked into our DNA from the beginning, that we aren't trying to become something new, but rather returning to what we were always meant to be. I paused, letting the words sink in. My grandfather wasn't perfect. No business leader is. But he built this company to last, to serve its customers honestly, to provide meaningful work for its employees. Those are the values we're reclaiming together. As I continued outlining our path forward, the restoration plan, the new ethical frameworks, the cultural shifts we were implementing, I noticed something changing in the room. The wariness that had greeted me in my early days was giving way to something else. Not blind faith, but cautious optimism. A willingness to believe that we could actually emerge from this crisis stronger than before. After the meeting, Daniel Reeves approached me, his typically reserved expression softening into something close to approval. "That was well done," he said. "Honest without being demoralizing. Hopeful without being unrealistic. Thank you." I had come to value his judgment over the past months. Do you think they believe we can do this? Really turn things around? He considered the question carefully. I think they want to believe. That's half the battle with organizational change, getting people to believe it's possible. And the other half, proving it every day, in every decision, until the new way becomes the only way. He smiled slightly. Your grandfather used to say that character isn't built in moments of grand challenge. It's built in 1,000 tiny choices when no one's watching. That evening, I returned to what was now legally my home, the family estate that had once been Victoria's. The court had formally transferred ownership to me as part of the asset seizure process, though I had been slow to make it truly mine. Too many memories, too much history, but tonight felt different. I wandered through rooms that had once intimidated me, seeing them with new eyes. This wasn't just Victoria's rejected domain or my grandfather's legacy. It was becoming my home, a place where I could build my own future while honoring the past. In the study, I settled into my grandfather's old leather chair and opened my laptop. There was one more thing I needed to do before I could truly close this chapter. I opened my email and began typing. Dear Victoria, I know you probably won't want to hear from me, but there are things that need to be said. Today we received conclusive evidence that you fabricated documents to implicate Grandpa in your financial schemes. I won't pretend to understand how you could do that to a man who loved you, who gave you everything. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because despite everything that's happened between us, you're still my sister. The prosecutors have added new charges based on this evidence. Your sentencing hearing is next month. I can't change what's coming, nor should I try to, but I want you to know that when you eventually complete your sentence, I'll be here. Not to gloat, not to judge, but because family should mean something, even when it's broken. The door will be open when you're ready. Katherine? I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send. Victoria might never accept my olive branch. She might hate me until her dying day, but I needed to extend it anyway. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because the woman I wanted to be, the leader I was becoming, wouldn't let bitterness define her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following week brought unexpected news. Blake's plea deal had been formalized, and as part of his community service, he had been ordered to conduct ethics training for business students at local universities. His first session would be at my former law school, a poetic justice that wasn't lost on me. More surprising was the message from Lyle, my grandfather's longtime assistant. Found something you should see. His text read, "In the boathouse." The boathouse sat at the edge of the property, on a small lake where my grandfather had taught Victoria and me to sail as children. I hadn't been inside in years, not since before he fell ill. When I arrived, Lyle was already there, standing beside a dust-covered sailboat, the very one from those childhood lessons. "What am I looking at?" I asked, glancing around the weathered wooden structure. Lyle pointed to the boat's name, painted in faded blue on the stern. "Second Chances." "I don't understand," I admitted. "Your grandfather renamed it the week after you left law school," Lyle explained. "Everyone thought you had failed, thrown away a promising career, but Charles said you were the bravest person he knew. Said you'd had the courage to start over when you realized you were on the wrong path." My throat tightened. He never told me that. "He was going to," Lyle said softly. "The day before his stroke, he asked me to arrange for the boat to be refurbished. Said he wanted to take you sailing again, just the two of you. Tell you how proud he was that you'd found your own way." Tears pricked at my eyes as I ran my fingers over the peeling paint. Even then, before anyone could have predicted the crisis that would engulf the company, my grandfather had been thinking about second chances. About renewal and rebuilding. "Thank you for showing me this," I said when I could trust my voice again. Lyle nodded. "I thought it might help, with everything you're facing at the company." Charles believed in second chances. For people, for businesses, for relationships. He would have approved of what you're doing now. 3 months later, Winters Global held its first shareholder meeting since the crisis began. The stock had stabilized somewhat, though it remained well below its previous highs. Industry analysts were cautiously positive about our restructuring efforts. Customers had largely remained loyal, appreciating our transparency throughout the process. As I prepared to address the shareholders, many of whom had lost significant value because of Victoria's actions, I thought about that boat, second chances. It seemed an appropriate theme for what I needed to say. "Good morning," I began, standing at the podium in the company's main conference center. "Thank you for being here today, and for your patience during this unprecedented period in Winters Global's history." I glanced down at my prepared remarks, then set them aside. This needed to come from the heart. When my grandfather founded this company, he wasn't thinking about quarterly earnings or stock options or market capitalization. He was thinking about building something that would last. Something that would provide value to customers, meaningful work to employees, and stability to communities. Faces in the audience were attentive, if reserved. Somewhere along the way, those priorities got inverted. Short-term profits became the driving force. Results trumped methods. The how became less important than the what. I paused, making eye contact with several long-term shareholders in the front row. Today, we're going back to basics. We're recommitting to my grandfather's original vision, but adapting it for the modern world. I believe, that ethical business isn't just the right thing to do, it's ultimately the profitable thing to do. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out our plan in detail, the restructured divisions, the enhanced compliance frameworks, the cultural initiatives, the new product lines that leveraged our core competencies while opening new market opportunities. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before the questions began. They were tough, probing, skeptical, exactly as they should be. These people had lost money because of leadership failures. They deserved straight answers. I gave them the unvarnished truth. Yes, recovery would take time. Yes, there would be further short-term pain. No, we couldn't guarantee immediate stock price recovery. But what we can guarantee, I concluded, is that Winters Global will once again be a company you can be proud to own. A company that makes money the right way. A company built to last. The vote of confidence that followed wasn't unanimous, but it was substantial enough to validate our path forward. The board renewed my contract, removing the interim from my title. I was now officially the CEO of Winters Global Enterprises. As the meeting concluded, Janet Wilson approached me, a hint of a smile on her normally stern face. "Charles would be pleased," she said simply. "Not just with what you're doing, but with who you've become to do it." I nodded, grateful for her support over these difficult months. "I'm still learning." "That's what makes you different from Victoria," she observed. She thought she knew everything already. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later, when Victoria's sentencing hearing took place. I attended, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, unsure if she would even acknowledge my presence. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the circumstances that had brought her here. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, she stood slowly, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "I have prepared remarks," she began, her voice steadier than I had expected. "But first, I want to address something directly." She turned, scanning the courtroom until her eyes found mine. For a moment, the old hardness flashed across her features, but then something shifted. "My sister is here today," she said, turning back to the judge. "Katherine. The one who exposed what I had done. The one who is now trying to save the company I nearly destroyed." The judge nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've spent my life competing with her," Victoria admitted. "Always needing to win, to be the favorite, to have more. It's why I did most of what I did, to prove I was smarter, more successful, more worthy. But in trying to win at all costs, I lost everything that actually matters." Her voice cracked slightly. "I falsified documents to implicate our grandfather in my crimes. A man who loved me, who trusted me with his life's work. I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." I sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. This was a Victoria I had never seen. Vulnerable, honest, broken. "I can't undo what I've done," she continued. "I can't give back the money I lost for shareholders or the jobs that were eliminated because of my actions. I can't restore the trust I violated, but I can at least acknowledge the truth, take full responsibility, and accept whatever sentence the court deems appropriate." The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 8. As Victoria was led away, our eyes met one final time. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something like acceptance. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for my reaction. I answered their questions briefly, emphasizing that the company was moving forward, focused on rebuilding rather than dwelling on past wrongdoing. As the press conference concluded, I noticed a familiar figure waiting at the edge of the crowd, my former 4th grade student Emma, now in middle school. Her mother stood beside her, smiling tentatively. "Miss Winters," Emma called, waving excitedly. "I saw you on TV. Mom says you're a big, important CEO now." I laughed, genuinely delighted by her enthusiasm. "I am, but I miss teaching sometimes." "Do you still have the picture I drew you?" she asked earnestly. "The one with the rainbow and the castle?" "It's framed in my office," I assured her, touched that she remembered. "It reminds me of what's important." As we chatted, I realized something profound. In all the chaos of the past year, taking over the company, discovering Victoria's crimes, fighting to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed, I had somehow found my way back to what mattered most. Not money, not power, not winning some lifelong sibling rivalry, but connection, purpose, making a difference in people's lives. My grandfather had seen that in me long before I fully understood it myself. He had recognized that my decision to leave law school for teaching wasn't a failure but a realignment with my true values. And when the company he loved needed those same values, he had made sure I would be in a position to provide them. 1 year to the day after I had become CEO, I sailed my grandfather's restored boat, Second Chances, out onto the lake behind the family home. The autumn air was crisp, the water reflecting golden and crimson from the trees along the shore. I had invited the company's executive team for a weekend retreat, but for this moment, I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. Winters Global was on solid footing again. Not fully recovered, but healing. Our stock had regained half its lost value. Our ethical reforms had become a case study at business schools. Most importantly, the culture had shifted. Employees were proud again, engaged, committed to our renewed mission. Victoria remained in prison, though we had begun a cautious correspondence. Her letters showed glimpses of the sister I had known before ambition consumed her. Thoughtful, occasionally funny, increasingly reflective. I didn't know if true reconciliation was possible, but I was open to finding out. As for the $85 million my grandfather had left me, I had used part of it to establish a foundation focused on business ethics education. The rest remained untouched, a safety net I hoped never to need again, but appreciated having nonetheless. The wind caught the sail, pushing the boat gently across the water. I trailed my fingers in the cool lake, thinking about cycles and seasons, endings and beginnings, failures and, yes, second chances. My grandfather had known that money and power were meaningless without purpose and integrity. He had built his company on that belief, even if there had been moments when he struggled to fully live up to it. Victoria had forgotten that truth, chasing wealth and status until she lost sight of everything else. And I? I was still learning, still finding my way. But as the boat skimmed across the water, carrying me forward into an uncertain but hopeful future, I knew one thing for certain. The inheritance that mattered most wasn't the money or the company or even the family name. It was the wisdom to recognize what truly matters, the courage to stand up for it, and the faith that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, is always the best investment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.